Hey guys, Osahan here. Excited, week number 2 of our Esther series, Courage in Chaos. Now, week number 1, last week, in case you missed it, I highly advise you check it out, talking about what it looks like to have God working behind the scenes in our lives. But week number 2, and this week, wanted to see what it looks like for us to respond in pressure moments. Now, maybe you've seen my face before in a few Hollywood films. If you have, please let me know so I can sue and get my royalties, because I've never acted in a single Hollywood film. However, I do have friends who have acted in various films. And I had a friend back in the day who, is early 20s, is trying to break into, the Hollywood scene. And so I went with him on a couple occasions to go to an audition. And the one thing that I noticed in these audition rooms, in these spaces, is just how nervous people are. I mean, they're trying to memorize their lines. They're hoping to land, a particular role. They're trying to figure this thing out. But one thing that always impressed me about my friend Damone, was that he was always cool, calm, and collected. I remember we'd drive out to an audition. Remember a particular occasion, we were in West Hollywood driving out to an audition. And he is joking, we're having a good time, no pressure. You could tell he did not feel the pressure of the moment. It was a role that he really wanted, but he didn't feel the pressure of the moment. And what I came to realize about him was that there was no pressure for him, and he felt no pressure because he knew his role, he knew his lines, and he knew what to do when the lights were on. When the pressure came, he was ready to go. And so I asked this question for us today: how do we respond in the pressure moments? If we'd be honest, 2020 has felt like a huge pressure moment. It has tested our emotions. 2020 has tested our hearts, our resolve, our strength. We've experienced different transitions, right? Some of you, whether it's transitioning in terms of schooling, whether it's transitioning grades, whether it's transitioning, maybe some of you have moved from public school to homeschool. Like, we've experienced some transitions, right, friends? But the beautiful thing about what we see in Esther's story is we find some great tools that we can use to help us navigate the pressure, to help us be able to show up during the pressure moments. It's like my friend Damone. When you know your role, when you know your lines, it'll help you know what to do when the lights and the pressure is on. And so if you missed last week, like I said, go back and check it out. But just to give you a brief recap, chapters 1 and 2 really set the scene for this story in regards to Esther's life, and even go as far as to show us how Esther ends up becoming this queen, a queen over a region that stretched 3,000 miles. From what is today modern-day Pakistan to modern-day northern Sudan. It's a huge region. They broke it up into 127 provinces. And so we see in chapters 1 and 2 how she comes to be in this position of power. But chapters 3 and 4 kind of are the centerpiece of Esther's entire story. In chapter 3, it details how this guy Haman is just an evil man, but he's one of the most powerful men in the entire kingdom. And Haman comes about with this sick, sinister plan to wipe out the Jews. Now, like I detailed in week 1, the Jews were kind of split in half. There was a good portion of them who decided at this time to go back to Israel, to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, rebuild their homeland after having been in captivity for so long. But then there was a segment who stayed, a segment who, like Esther and her uncle Mordecai, decided to stay. And so Haman, for whatever reason, doesn't like the Jews, and so decides to go about this plan and this plot to get rid of them. In reality, to commit this injustice and really a genocide against God's people. And so the pressure is mounting for them. So Haman goes about and convinces the king to set about this decree that on a particular day that the Jews could be slaughtered across all 127 provinces, across all 3,000 miles. This particular group of people who happened to be God's chosen people were to be killed. And so Mordecai, Esther's uncle, gets wind of this plan. And so when he reads this decree, he instantly is broken and falls into tears. And the people are all broken. But Mordecai realizes something. Hey, my niece is the queen. This girl who's like a daughter in my life, she is the queen. Let me go ask her to see what she can do in this moment of pressure, how to respond. And now when I think about pressure moments that I've had in my life, I actually think about some advice that was given to me by an elderly lady. She wasn't my grandma, but she was like a grandma to me, Grandma Strong. Okay, what a last name, Strong. But she had seen a lot in her life. She had lived through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Great Depression, all of these things she had lived through. Her husband had ended up being a major diplomat in America to foreign countries. And so she had seen a lot of life. And I'll never forget it. First time I ever heard her speak at my church, she said, "Now y'all young people, listen, I got 3 pieces of advice for you to be able to handle anything that comes in life. It's these three things. Be brave, be bold, and be blessed." And that's how we handle the pressure, friends. To be brave, be bold, and be blessed. To be brave. We see when Esther is approached by her uncle Mordecai about this situation, Esther isn't immediately like, "Yes, I got the solution. Let's go do it." As a matter of fact, Esther threw kind of an excuse out there, and she kind of put her fear out there. She said this. This is what Esther says in the moment. Let me read it here. In Esther chapter 4, she says this in verse number 10. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." Esther, some would call it an excuse, others would call it really just her explaining what her fear was. The fear that because she hadn't been summoned by the king, that if she was to approach the king about what was burdening her, about the pressure of this moment, that she was afraid she could be put to death. And sometimes us being brave doesn't mean us showing up with all the answers. Sometimes us being brave is us being brave enough to be honest about our fear. What is the thing that has you gripped with fear in this season? Maybe it's you being honest about your anxiety in this time. Maybe it's you being honest about your doubts in this time. Maybe it's you being honest about your frustrations and your anger with this time that we're in. Either way, it takes bravery to be honest. But here's the beautiful thing in our honesty and with our fears is that when we're honest with God about them, what we will find is that He will give us exactly what we need. In 2 Timothy 1:7, it says this. It says, "For God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control." That in exchange for our fear, if we are willing to be honest with God about it, God gives back to us power, a power that is greater than any fear that is before us, that is greater than any situation that is in front of us. The same power, I was thinking about this earlier this week in Psalm 33, it says this of God, that He made the heavens by His word, and the host of them, or the stars, by His breath. And that same breath, when you think about it, is the same breath of life that He breathed into us. So the same breath that formed the stars is the same breath that lives inside of you. And that is the same power that is at our hands to be able to overcome any fear that stands before us. So be brave. The second thing is to be bold. Now, Esther wasn't necessarily bold in this moment, but I'll tell you who was, her uncle Mordecai. He calls her on the carpet, and this is his response when he hears what Esther says. In verse number 12, it says this. It says, "When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another. For if you remain silent at this time, think about that. The weight of remaining silent in the moment. And he goes on to say this, but you and your father's family will perish, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Mordecai is bold with Esther and tells her, listen, if you don't do it, don't think that you'll escape what's happening. In the time that we live in this world that we're living in right now, we see all kinds of injustices going on. Yet, much like Esther, if we remain silent, trust and believe that God will send somebody to remind you, someone who will be bold enough to remind you of the call that God has on our lives to speak forward with boldness against the injustices that we see. Whether it be against people that don't look like us, that don't look like you, to speak up on their behalf. In Proverbs 31, it tells us to cry out for those who are oppressed and for the poor and for those who have had injustice done against them. To be bold, to speak up. Even you may think, there's not much I can say. No one's going to listen to me. Who am I? I'm too young. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, we're told this, to let no one despise you or look down upon you because of your youth. You have a voice. Use your voice even now. But Mordecai gives Esther this bold warning that if you don't do it, it'll come from somewhere else. But who knows that if you are here in this time in your position for this moment right now. Think about it, friends. You could have been born in any other period in history, but you were born in the 2000s to be witness to what we are seeing right now. Why? Not for you to sit back as a bystander and say, well, that's happening out there. But as people of God, to stand up and to speak up against the injustice that you may see or you may be experiencing. And also, think about this as well. Esther wasn't fully aware of what was going on. Esther allowed herself to be educated by Mordecai about what was going on and the seriousness of it. And in response, that's when she finally decided to speak up. The same goes for us. Maybe we don't know about all the injustices going on in the world around us, but to have the ability to look at those things and to speak up is necessary. And so Mordecai's boldness stirs up Esther to be bold. And here's what Esther says in response when she hears it. She says this in verse number 15. She says that Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Esther had a boldness to know, after hearing Mordecai's boldness and Mordecai giving her insight into how she should respond. She said, if I perish, I perish. But she was willing to respond in that pressure moment in a way that maybe was outside of her when she first heard about it, but she was willing to, like I mentioned my friend Damone, she was willing to take her role and know her role and what to do when the moment came. What does it look like to be blessed? Well, we are blessed to be a blessing. When we look at our lives, we'll be honest. If we look outside of ourselves and don't just focus on the current situation we're in, we'll see that honestly our lives are maybe better off than even we realized. But we have the opportunity in what God has blessed us with, breath in our lungs, life in our limbs, a home to sleep in, a bed to lay our heads on, that we are blessed to be a blessing. So looking at Esther, how was she blessed to be a blessing? She was elevated to the position of queen through just a crazy series of events. Like we said, this series is called Courage in Chaos. So through a crazy series of chaotic events and God's providence, his guidance, and his care for her, she ends up being the queen. Why? Because God knew that there was going to come this moment where this injustice was going to come against his people, and he would need someone to speak up and someone to be a blessing to them in that moment. And who ends up being that person? Well, Esther, obviously, but how does it happen? We'll find out next week. But as we wrap up, I just want to leave you with this thought. I was on the internets this week, on the good old Instagrams. I'm scrolling through and I see this video circulating through, a bunch of my friends had posted it. And it was of this 11-year-old kid who was collecting diapers and donations to help people who are less fortunate. And so a lady pulls up in a truck and she gives him $200 and she starts crying. And she says, "Come here, I want to tell you something." She says, "There was a time when I didn't have this truck. I didn't have really anything. I was homeless and I was living in a shelter, and I had kids, I had babies, and there were people who were donating, diapers and things to me. And I just want to let you know that what you're doing right now is to be able to help someone else who was like me back in my time, but I want to be able to give back." You see, what this lady realized was that in the blessings that she had got in her life, to be able to move her from a place of homelessness and helplessness and really relying on others, she came to a point where she realized, I've been given so much. How much more should I give back and give to others who are maybe in a similar situation as me? So I would challenge you guys, take time this week to really think, how can I be brave in what I feel is a pressure moment? How can I be bold? You may say, I don't know how to do that. Ask God. He will give you the strength. But lastly, how can I be blessed, and in being blessed, go and bless others who maybe don't have it as good as I do? How can I speak up when the lights and the pressure are on? Because like my friend Damone, you can respond well when you know your lines being this good book. When you know your role to speak up against injustice, to speak up against the wrong. And you will know what to do when the pressure is on, no matter how big or small the situation. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you. I thank you that you have blessed each and every one of us, and you haven't done it just for us to take in the blessing and keep it to ourselves, but you've blessed us to be a blessing. I pray, Lord, that you would speak to each and every one of our hearts and remind us that you have not given us a spirit of fear. I pray that we'd be brave enough to be honest with you about our fears and our doubts, and in exchange see your spirit of power, love, and self-control that you give. I pray that we would find you to be the one who gives us boldness. You said that those who are righteous, those who are your people, stand as bold as lions. And I pray that we would truly see how blessed we are and not rest upon that, but turn around and be a blessing to others who are in less fortunate situations than us. We thank you for your peace, because it is your peace that surpasses all understanding. And it's in your name we pray these things, Jesus. Amen.